So in the last video, we showed you how to create a form, send a CSRF protected request to our store method, and then store it in a database and redirect back to our page. But at the moment, there's no validation on this input. So the user could send anything in this request. They could even send nothing. So at the top of our store method, let's create a new variable called validated. I'm going to set this equal to a validator facade, and then we're going to call the method make. So we're going to make a new validator here. And again, if you're not using PHP Storm, you will have to bring this namespace in. So up at the top of your file, you can see here, it's done it for me, but you might have to manually type this, and you're going to use Illuminate support facades validator. And then as the first parameter in here, we need to pass in the request. So because we've already typed into it here, Laravel has made it available to us in this method. So we can say request, and then a method on the request all. We want to pass in all the requests to this validator. And then as a second parameter, it takes an array of what we want to validate. Let's just close this off with a semicolon. So what do we want to validate? We want to validate our title input, and then we need to pass in the rules of what we want it to validate on. So one rule we can do here is required. And there's a load of rules you can add in here. Now let me just jump over to the documentation and show you this. So over in the documentation, if we come under the basics and then scroll down to validation, if we just scroll down here and go to available validation rules, you can see these are all the available validation rules. So we've used required already. Now let's look at min and max. So you can see here max and min. Let's just click on this. And you can see here we can pass in a max and then a value. So the maximum size of this. And then minimum also works in the same way. Just scroll down, it's minimum and then a value. So let's add these validations in. So to add another validation rule, you just do a pipe, which is a straight up line. And we can say min. So we want this to be a minimum of 5 characters long. And then we want to set a max, and we'll set the max of 255. And we're setting this as 255 because the limit in a database for a string is 255 characters long. So we don't want the user to input anything larger than that. Okay, so now this will run the validation. It'll make sure the title is required. So it'll make sure the user's put something in. It'll make sure it's got a minimum value of 5 and a maximum of 255 characters long. So now we need to check whether this has failed. So if it has failed, obviously we don't want to save it to the database. So we can say if our validated data fails, so there's a helper method on there called fails. So if it does fail, what we will do, we'll return a redirect again, just like we did at the bottom of this method here. And we'll also redirect back again, so back to the same page. And what we'll do is we'll redirect with errors, and then we'll just pass in our validated. So if any of these don't match, Laravel will send a validation error back, and we'll also send it back with input, so what the user currently inputted. So in our blade view now, we need to check for any errors and list them out to the user. So over in our blade file, let's say underneath our form here, we can now check if any errors have been passed. And because we use the helper method here with errors, in our blade file, we have access to an errors array. We can use the blade directed if again, if the errors variable is populated, and we can say has any. So if there's anything in the errors array, let's just close this if off with end if. So if the errors has anything in it, what we can do is we can just loop over and list them errors out. Let's create an unordered list, and we'll just create a for each loop. And this is exactly the same as what we did for listing out our posts. We're just doing an if and then a for each, so there's nothing new here. So we can say for each of the errors, and we're grabbing all the errors as error. And then inside of our for each, let's create a list item. Let's open up our double curly braces here, and then we can just list out the error. So in our post controller, if the validation fails, we're sending a redirect back with the errors. We're checking if there is any errors. If there is, we're looping over them and we're outputting the error here. Let's try this out in the browser. So over in our application, I'm just going to hit save post without typing anything in. And you can see here the title field is required. Now let's type something in that's less than 5 characters. So I'm just going to write test and let's save this. And you can see here the title must be at least 5 characters. So the validation is running, it's checking it's required, it's checking that it's over 5 characters, and it's also checking that it's less than 255 characters. So let's make this pass validation now. This is a valid post title, and then save. And you can see there that runs with no validation errors, and it's saved our new post title into the database. Now, as I said, there's loads of validation rules, so always just checking the documentation. Let's just scroll up to the full list. So there's all of these built in. You can create your own, but I'm not going to be covering that in this introduction series. But you'll find that Laravel already has out of the box almost everything that you're going to probably want to validate on user input. So don't forget to like and subscribe to this video. Check out my website at penguindigital.co.uk where you can download a copy of this code. And don't forget when you subscribe to hit that notification bell so you'll get a notification when the next video in this series is out.